Well, hello and welcome back to the very latest episode of my Love Machine podcast. Now, today I have got something very special. There is no particular theme, but instead I've got a wonderful interview with someone who is a renowned expert, the expert in fact, the world's leading divorce coach, Sara Davison. Sara has been doing this for many years and we've spoken before, but I thought it'd be really useful to get her here on my podcast and to talk about all the things she does and how she helps people get through divorces and how ultimately they can move on in a happier way. Sara, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on, James. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Now, we've spoken a few times before. I've appeared on your podcast, which I really enjoyed. So I thought the time had come to get you on here and to talk about all the things that you do. Because ultimately, my job is about people finding new relationships. But because of that, many people have had a bad marriage or bad relationship and things haven't really worked out. So they come to me from a place of confusion, fear and frustration. And this is where you come in, isn't it? Because you help people get through divorces. So can you, first of all, tell my listeners exactly who you are and what you do in your line of work?
Yes, well, thank you for that. Yeah, well, I am known as the divorce coach, and I support people going through any kind of breakup and divorce. Having been through a really tough breakup divorce myself, that's when I really realized that there wasn't much help. This was about 12 years ago, for how to navigate that breakup and divorce process, which hit me like a freight train. I didn't see it coming. And overnight, I lost my husband, the father of my son, who was only one, and he was also my business partner. We had offices in London and Australia as well. And it was incredibly embarrassing, humiliating, that I hadn't seen it coming because a lot of other people had, should we put it that way. So I had to pick myself up off the bathroom floor, having done a lot of that ugly crying, and rebuild my life, really. So having gone through that, I really determined some ways that could help and fast track that process. So that's what I do today. I share everything I wish I'd had access to at that point in my own life to help people cope with the emotional roller coaster, but then also those practical challenges like becoming a single parent overnight or dating again, things like that, which I know you are the expert on with that.
Fantastic. So you had your own divorce, but you didn't know it was coming. There were no warning signs. Were your friends telling you that things weren't right before this and you were choosing to ignore them?
It's a really good question, James. I think looking back, there were plenty of warning signs, but when you've got your head firmly stuck in the sand, thinking, I'm going to get through this is all good, you don't really want to see those red flags in my own experience. My relationship wasn't the healthiest relationship, but whilst I was in it, I didn't really recognize that. I blamed myself for a lot of the challenges we were having. And I think really when you're in a toxic relationship, sometimes it's quite hard to see the wood for the trees. So for me, I believe marriage was forever. When I took my vows, I had no intention of getting divorced. I really believed that divorce was a failure and that wouldn't happen to me. And we'd work through it. You know, even if there were compromises to be made, I'd be making them. So that would never happen to me. So I think with that attitude, I didn't really pick up on some of the things that were glaringly obvious. And yes, there were things I wasn't happy with, but not enough to decide to leave the marriage.
I find it really interesting because when it comes to things like romance scams are very popular at the moment, things like the Tinder swindler and things like that, people often just choose to ignore the warning signs, don't they? They will think, well, okay, the grass is always greener, but do you know what? I'm going to stay with this person because I'm used to them. I'm used to their habits, behaviours and patterns. And it's easier, the better the devil you know, they say, don't they? Better the devil you know. So they're going to stay with somebody. And even many of these terrible, terrible toxic relationships, they last because someone just doesn't want to just end it, which is horrible. But ultimately, people do decide at the end of the day that they're going to split up, they're going to get divorced, and they're going to separate. And it can be an enormous shock, particularly if you aren't expecting it. But I think deep down, sometimes we do know, and sometimes we don't. But I think it's all an interesting topic, maybe for another day. But so now, what you do, you also coach people to become coaches, don't you?
I do. So I have a training school called the International Divorce Coach Centre of Excellence. And we have over 250 coaches now in 17 different countries around the world.
Wow.
Who I'm training to become breakup and divorce coaches so they can go out and help as many people as possible. That's the mission.
That's amazing. I remember seeing your adverts a few years ago, I think on Facebook. That's how I know about that. And now what's happened is because you've got so big, many people that you've trained are coming to me, one or two for coaching, which is great, and one or two just to come on my podcast and talk to me about things like this. So it must be a massive market at the moment. Mate, is that due to the pandemic in particular, or has it always been coming?
Well, there's been such a huge increase in divorces. I think the recent stats from Stewart's law firm in the UK said that divorces increased 132% in the last 12 months compared to the previous 12 months, which is huge. And obviously, a lot of that is due to the pandemic, being locked in four walls with somebody, however amicable it was to start with, that's going to be some challenges during that time. And if there were cracks already in that relationship, then obviously that was going to be a problem. And that's what we've seen. But we've also seen an increase in breakups from people that would have lasted the test of time, but the dynamic of having to be forced together for that amount of time just doesn't work for them. Maybe I've got a client at the moment who she likes to go out on weekends. She's a member of a tennis club and off she goes. He plays golf at the weekends. They've both got very different jobs. They work full time. They have kids. So they're back home around the table every evening for family dinner. But that's really about it. So when you take away being able to go to work, be able to play tennis, play golf, they were really stuck in a difficult place, and that dynamic didn't work for them. And it's sad to see that because it would have lasted the test of time if it hadn't been for the pandemic. But irreparable damage, I think, got done in that time. It just went on for too long for them to be able to sustain it.
Do you think the cracks were there to start with and the pandemic just made it worse?
I think that their relationship functioned because they didn't spend as much time together. I think that's always been the way, very independent people, different social groups, but they come together for the family, but the rest of their life was very independent. And I've seen that a lot. So I think it would have lasted. There are other clients of mine, though, that, it was already rocky. And then you put them into that situation and it's just a melting pot of disaster. So, and it's been really tricky. And also the rise in abusive relationships during that time in the pandemic as well. That I'm the patron of a domestic abuse charity, and they saw over 300% increase in calls to their helpline during those years, just because people were really desperate for the help.
Well, I can believe that. As much as it has brought people together as well, it has made people realise that maybe they weren't quite right together, and it's caused a lot of breakups, which I'm very much aware of. But I do also believe that, or personally, I've got a very strong marriage, luckily, but I think sometimes when you're forced to have your family around you 24/7, it can be a lot. I'm one of these people that needs to get my own space and go out for regular walks with my family or not, but I'm very lucky now I can work from home, I can do this remotely, but I do miss the sort of social side of this. But I think it's how you handle this at the time, and I can understand that people do get trapped with each other and they think I need my space and they can't get it anymore. That's going to cause argument. I've also heard that when it comes to divorce, that people that meet from online dating are actually more likely to get divorced. Have you heard about that?
I have. I mean, I don't know. I don't like to generalize. I think everybody's different. I've got, clients who've met online and they've been together for a long time. Other times, that doesn't work that way. But what I have seen, I don't know if you've seen this, James, in your line of work, is that sometimes people meet online during the pandemic and they haven't actually met in person for maybe a year, 2 years. And the bonds that they form and the conversations that they're having are going so much deeper than they would if you're on a first date, like face to face, going to a restaurant or a cafe and moving forward physically. That isn't happening. So they're having those conversations. They're talking about things like religion and politics and intimacy and things that we would never talk about in the real world face to face on a first or second date. So I think those relationships have the ability to last longer, purely because they're built on a much more solid friendship and you really know each other inside and out, even though you've never actually met.
That's definitely happened a lot. The only downside to that is I think people can almost form fantasy relationships after a while. If you haven't met somebody, you're talking to them several times a day and every single day for weeks and weeks and weeks and months and months and months, then you're almost hiding behind how it could be rather than reality, because you're imagining what's going to happen. You're thinking, well, this person's absolutely amazing. You're not seeing their darker side. And everyone's got some degree of a darker side. We're not all positive 24/7, as much as we might try and portray that to people. So I think it can become a fantasy if you're not careful behind it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I would, but I also have seen, those programs like I think we talked about it when you came on my podcast, like Love Is Blind, and you're
Yes.
actually watching those relationships form. I mean, that's in a very short period of time. That's a couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, I guess you've always got to be realistic. You've still got to look for those red flags. It may be more easy to manipulate somebody through a screen or down the phone line than face to face. So again, I think you've got to be intelligent about it. You've got to keep your eyes wide open and not be just desperate to fall in love. I think you still got to go through the vetting process for sure.
I think video dating and using things like Zoom definitely have helped that. If you've not seen someone face to face, then really there could be anybody. But a lot of people have used Zoom dating now, and they're using apps. All the apps have brought out this feature to talk on there by video, and it really has helped people form deeper, more meaningful connections. The trouble with things like Zoom, as I often say on my podcast, is there's no real eye contact because you're looking at a camera rather than each other's eyes. But I think if you can do some video dating, if for some reason why you can't meet somebody, but do try and meet them as quickly as you can, because if they're an amazing catch, they're going to be talking to other people, really. And go and meet them when you can. Don't leave it too long. I had a client the other day that came back to me after a couple of years. He's talking to someone for a whole year and hasn't met him, and realised he didn't even know his surname. And when she asked him, he wouldn't give her the surname to her. And of course, they never met, so he had no intention of ever actually meeting her. So she's come back disappointed. But I think she went into that thinking all fantasy, and it was almost like a role play, if anything else. But for some people, that's great. Some people need to do that. Now, if somebody comes to you in the early stages of maybe they're just about to go through a divorce now and they're feeling that pain and frustration, what advice do you give them in the early stages?
Yeah, it's a good question because I mean everyone comes at different stages. So it really depends on what is your ability to cope with stress. Some of us can sort of go through life and people wouldn't really notice on the outside we were dealing with huge amounts of stress. And others of us will fall apart and not be able to get out of bed. So again, it's going to be very individual to how you fit into that process. I think for most people, if there's a betrayal or that your breakup hits you out of the blue, I mean, I was talking to a lady from Australia over the weekend who believed she was really happily married. She's always posting on Instagram and Facebook. They've been on some lovely trips recently. Everything to her was amazing. And yet this weekend, he just turned to her and said, I want a divorce. I've actually met somebody else. And I think for anyone going through that amount of shock and betrayal, then obviously the world is going to implode and you're going to fall apart for a while. And that's okay. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be sad. It's okay because you are going through part of that natural grieving process. In fact, divorce is known as the second most traumatic life experience we go through after death of a loved one. So we're going to follow the same process. So you're going to go through that shock and denial, maybe that anger. So it's okay to give yourself time to adjust to that. So it's important to have good people around you. I call it your breakup support team. So picking carefully the people you want on your team, not the best friend who's going to chop up all his clothes and bag them up and send them off to the tip. Not that friend necessarily, although, it's good to spend time with everyone that cares about you, makes you feel good, but make sure they're giving you constructive advice. A lot of family members will be emotionally involved in your breakup too. So trying to find somebody that can give you some good concrete advice to help you move forward in a positive way is going to be essential. But looking after yourself, not being afraid to cry, getting outside, going for those walks, being in nature, which is scientifically proven to help you balance your emotional moods. Again, that's all going to help. And knowing it will pass. These things will pass. And there are lots of tools and techniques you can use when you're ready to start dialing down those negative emotions.
That's very true. People always think they're never going to meet somebody else and they are sullied goods, shall we say, and there's something wrong with them. And quite often it isn't the case at all. So I like to give them hope myself about finding new ways they can meet somebody when they're ready for that. But I think that's great about the whole getting your support circle as well. That's a really important thing because maybe you've neglected them over the years when you've been with your partner. Maybe you've not seen your family and friends as much as you'd like to. Now is a great time to reconnect and spend time with them because if in 6 months' time or even 2 years' time you've met somebody else, these poor people, are going to be left neglected again. So make the most of it now and enjoy these memories when you do that. So that's great advice there. Thank you. Now, there are many different reasons people can go through a divorce. The catalyst for this, infidelity, unmet expectations, all these different things. What would you say is the number one reason people end up in a divorce?
Well, I mean, it probably all boils down to poor communication along the way somewhere. Most of my clients are dealing with some form of betrayal, but if you strip that back, quite often that sort of disconnect happened quite a long time before then. So they've been sort of maybe pushing their worries and their concerns under the carpet, sticking their head in the sand. Maybe they're not people that want to face conflict, they don't enjoy that. So they've just really been trying to just sweep it all under the carpet, forget about it and build. But what happens is it festers until it builds to such a point where it can be something really simple that just blows the whole thing apart. So communication, I think, is really key to maintain that throughout a relationship, and have the courage, if you're not happy about something, to ask your partner about it, maybe not in a confrontational way, but in a way that suggests, did you realize that when you do this, it makes me feel unhappy or sad, or whatever that emotion is for you? Is that your intention? And just putting it out there, because, you know, hopefully if it's a healthy relationship, they'll say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. No idea I was doing that. I'll try and change that, rather than just letting it go and tolerating, because that builds resentment. And I think that's when we sort of get further down the line to betrayals, people looking for attention elsewhere, people not wanting to come home because the tension in the house isn't great. So again, dealing with these things as they come up is always the best way forward if you can do that.
That's interesting, because I always tell people that when they start dating somebody new. If somebody is doing things right, that's wonderful. But I say treat men like puppies in particular. So men need a bit of training, a bit of guidance. When you're with someone to start with, you've got your own patterns, your own behaviours that you've learned by being on your own. And so do they. And you're going to come together, you're going to form new patterns, new behaviours and new routines. If 3 months in, you start having a go at your partner and say, I wish you'd call me more rather than texting me, for example, that's a really hard time to get them to change. So very early on, communicate. So I love it. I love to hear from you, but it'd be great to get the odd phone call as well. Let them know, let your partner know what you want and give them a bit of guidance, and hopefully they will know what to do. It's no good waiting 3 months, 3 years into this and then causing problems. What was interesting there is that I asked you a very tough question about the number one reason for divorce. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a hard question I've thrown at you. And it didn't throw you, of course, because you are the expert, so you have an answer for that. But I was thinking, oh no, I've given you too hard a question there, because it could be anything. But of course, you're the expert, and I love how it didn't throw you there. So much respect for that.
Thanks, James. Bring it on, James. Any difficult questions?
I've got loads of them. I probably didn't warn you, but I don't really script this. Whatever comes out of my mouth at any one time comes out. And my listeners will know that as well, because I can ask 3 questions at once sometimes. I often do.
I love it.
So pick the one that you like. Go for the one in the middle. That's the one that they say. Was that Rocky? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So who are your typical clients? Is it mainly women that you coach, or men as well?
So I coach both men and women. A lot of the coaches I train prefer either just to coach women or men. It really, but for me, I've been coaching for 26 years. So yeah, I'm quite comfortable and I enjoy working with both men and women. And when I run my retreats as well, we quite often have men and women in the room, which actually can give a really interesting perspective, because it's not uncommon for some women to be men haters after a tough breakup, maybe a betrayal. But actually having some good guys in the room who can give them a different focus, a different perspective on their situation, can actually really dial down some of that animosity and really start to break down some of those barriers and walls as well they have towards dating again, and that all men are horrible. Suddenly it becomes a possibility. And it works both ways, for men and women.
That's a long time coaching. My initial thought there was, how could you be coaching since you were 5?
No, older than I look, I think it's the right.
You have good lighting, I've got to say. You have good lighting.
It's very good lighting.
That's a good lighting.
Yeah, I've got my mum's genes, luckily. So yeah, I think I look a lot younger than I am.
I can't help but notice, because I don't always use the video for this, and so what I'm seeing in the background, you've got various books that you've written here. Talk me through the books quickly. What you've got? You've got 2 books here. One called The Split and one called Uncoupling. Talk me through them both quickly, because it fascinates me.
Yeah, so Uncoupling was my first book, and that was a published book that I got a book deal for. And it basically goes through my own personal story of finding out my ex-husband was having an affair. The ugly crying is detailed, and some of the crazy things I did in the early days to sort of help, I thought, rebuild my confidence and get me back on track. And then I also share the things that really work for me. So Uncoupling is a bit more of my personal story, but with a lot of tools and techniques woven in. The Split is a book that I brought out 3 years ago, which is called the split. It's breakup to breakthrough in 30 days or less. And basically gives you something to hang on to in those early days. So if you're going through a breakup, it gives you a tool or a technique to try and experiment with every day for 30 days. So yeah, it's a bit of a guide to give you some momentum to really help you see some positive changes in just 30 days.
It looks really good. The fact I can read that from this distance is quite impressive. Either my eyesight's really good or you've got a really good book design there. Are these on Amazon?
Yeah, they're both on Amazon. Yes, yeah, they are.
So how do you reach people most? Is it by Zoom coaching, from your events, from group coaching, from products? What do you do most?
Yeah, so we've got lots of different ways to access it because there's so many people out there with different budgets, different needs. So obviously there's one-to-one coaching, which can be in person, although these days most people just want to jump on Zoom. So that works as well. You can either have coaching with me or with one of my accredited breakup and divorce coach practitioners as well. I also run weekly support groups, which is something I'm just launching at the moment, actually, James, which are my Heartbreak to Happiness weekly support groups, where you can jump on to a Zoom meeting. There's about 20 people maximum on any of those groups, and you can meet other people who are going through very similar things. Maybe your friends are a bit sick of hearing you talk about your breakup. Maybe they think you should be over it by now, or maybe they just don't know how to handle it. Maybe you're feeling really alone. So you can jump on, meet other people, hear some of the stories, share as much as you're comfortable with, but also you'll be doing it knowing that there's a professional, either me or one of my coaches on there, who can give you some advice and some help and answer your questions. So they're hourly every week. So that's another option for some people. That's only £9.97 a week. So it's super cheap and it's easy and nice to get into a community. We also run retreats. So I have a retreat coming up pretty soon in May. I run them every sort of 3 to 4 months. It's my breakup recovery retreat, which is 2 days intense with me at Ashdown Park Hotel in the UK. Quite often have people flying in. We've got someone flying in from India this time to join us. And we're basically taking you on the journey from dealing with the heartbreak, dealing with any of the issues you've got going on with your ex, wiping the slate clean, giving you your power back so you can cope better with some of those negative emotions, and then rebuilding your life moving forward so you actually get to feel excited again. So there's lots of different ways you can interact with me and my coaching team, lots of different opportunities to get involved.
That's amazing. Do you remember a sitcom years ago called Dear John? Does that ring a bell at all?
No, I don't remember that.
I've just been watching it recently. It's on one of the old Sky channels, and it's about a man whose wife leaves him and leaves him a Dear John letter. And it's written by Jim Sullivan, who wrote Only Fools and Horses and many of the great sitcoms. And it's all about him going to a support group and meeting other people who are going through separation and divorce. And it's very, very funny. And they do little events. I thought, what you're doing now is on a much grander, more futuristic scale. Amazing. But really, going back to how it used to be back in maybe the 80s, they would sit around in the village hall and they'd have a conversation and get together and have a drink after. So it's all the same sort of thing, but you do it on a much bigger scale and much better, of course. But it's funny how, I think you should watch that if you can, Dear John. There's some great characters.
I will.
I love all the characters in it because he's a genius. But that just popped into my brain because I've just been watching it. And I think, well, do these things even exist now? There must be support groups like that when people get together in the community. But I think if you can go onto a Zoom group or a Facebook group or all these things and have more people, then you can just do it from home. Because people are quite vulnerable going through this, aren't they, of course? And they might want to put themselves out to a real life event. So I think you've got a whole variety of different choices and options here. But to ask you another question, you mentioned about how people can get their power back and get their sense of self. What advice do you give them if someone's going through that right now and they feel really helpless and they feel they're not good enough? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think it's important to know that we all control the remote control to our brain. It's that when we're born, we don't get the manual. So we kind of have to sort of figure it out as we go, don't we? And
it sounds like dating apps.
Yeah, it's true. But it's about learning to dial down those negative emotions. And if if you're being triggered by something, then we need to look at what that is and when does that happen? Does it happen first thing in the morning? If so, what are you doing first thing in the morning? What's helping that to happen and what can we change so that pattern doesn't run the same anymore? So, for example, I've got a client at the moment, every time she wakes up in the morning, she says it feels like a tsunami of negative emotions hits her. As soon as she opens her eyes. So I asked her to break down her morning routine, and the alarm would beep at her and then it would click into Radio 4, which, I mean, for those of you that love Radio 4, I have nothing against it, but it's not exactly the most uplifting thing to wake up to first thing in the morning. Yeah. So we swapped that for her power song, which is the song that makes her feel more alive. That's going to wake her up. And then she's going to get straight out of bed instead of pulling the duvet over her head. And then we're going to change things up and she's going to go out for a walk. And we just change things around to really help empower. So it's really about getting to know yourself so that you can change your reactions. In that instant, you might feel upset, you might feel hurt, you might feel devastated, but you can control that. It does take a bit of practice, but it is pretty simple to do. And that's what we're trained to do. And that's what I do every day with my clients. So knowing that you can change how you feel and just holding on to the hope, even if you don't have the how right now, that it will get better. And actually you can turn your pain into your power, and that adversity can actually make you stronger and happier in the future.
Completely agree with you there. I think people always do meet someone else once you're ready for it. And you'll end up, as long as you've got, you learn from the mistakes of the past, not necessarily your own mistakes. Maybe you can make better choices in the future. But I think just doing something about it and reaching out and trying something new and getting yourself back on the path again is the best way. And I'll ask you about that in a second as well, because that's maybe where we do things together, because we advise people what to do next. But something else you mentioned just then is about your clients' morning rituals. And I've asked this question a lot on my podcast over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to ask you, do you have any particular morning rituals or routines that you do consistently?
Oh, yes. I think it's really important because you can set your day up to feel good, or you can set it up to just be a complete disaster, in my opinion, for me. So I know that, on a weekday, my alarm will go off and I have to have some happy music waking me up. Gentle, but happy. That's important to me. Not a beep, 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 because that will just irritate me from the get-go. So setting those things up, like your alarm tones and things like that, are key. I always get up, have a shower, and then I'm out the door. I like to go either walk my dog or go for a run, or even just a fast walk, depending on how I'm feeling that day. But being out in nature to me is really important. And I have to start my day off that way. It really sets it up to win.
Yeah, me too. I always try and do that. Go out for a nice long walk, even if it's raining, walk through the woods, walk my son to school, wherever it might be. I think that's really useful. But having some sort of plan rather than just being hit and miss is the best way to have structure. Then you can have goals and work towards them. Many people just get through, go to work, come back again, watch TV, have a dinner, go to bed. And you repeat the same cycle and you live for the weekend. But I guess you're a bit like me in some ways. You probably work all different times and don't really have a weekend in the same way. Do you work weekends if someone needs you? I suppose you do.
I work every weekend, James, every weekend. Yeah. But, I tend to try and keep Sundays for my family. So Sundays is a day for me. So whether that's just going to my gym or going for walks or seeing friends, that's tends to be my day off. But I work odd hours like you, I'm sure, because I have clients all over the world. So, if I'm on a webinar in the States, it will be evenings, it can be early mornings. So, but I think if you love what you do, then it's not really work, is it? And I really do love what I do.
I'm the same. I don't really see this as working. I get to just talk to people and empower them and have a bit of a laugh, or make them realise their own value and love themselves. And there's nothing better than that, is there? Because we're teaching people that there is hope and the frustration's over. So speaking of which, I asked you a few minutes ago, we're going to talk about this. What advice do you give someone who's ready to move forward and meet someone new? I know I have my own advice, but I'd like to hear from you.
Well, I'm sure it's pretty similar. I mean, I think it's really important, first of all, to work on you first. So to work out what it is that you want from a partner and really do the groundwork, because my clients, I don't know about yours, James, but when I see them coming out of tough breakups, they usually have two criteria for meeting a new partner. Number one is they have a pulse. And number two is they show them one sign of affection. And then they go into what I've termed limpet mode, where they sort of sucker themselves to this poor person, thinking, well, at least I'm never going to be alone. That's my biggest fear. And I'm not going to be alone because I've met this person. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that that's not the best formula. So I often take my clients through my ideal partner exercise, which basically looks at not only what they want, because I think we're all pretty good at knowing what we want, aren't we? Whether it's tall, dark, handsome, short, blonde, blue eyes, we kind of know what we're physically attracted to, but what do we need? And I think especially a lot of my clients who are coming out of toxic relationships, they won't really focus so much on what they need. So they may, need someone who's kind, somebody that is honest, someone that is generous, someone that is thoughtful. all these things maybe they weren't having in past relationships. Because it's very common to come out of one toxic relationship and jump straight into another because it's what you know. Yeah. So learning and educating yourself about what are the signs, what are the red flags, so that you can, if they come up anywhere in a conversation, on a first date, deploy your parachute and get the hell out the building. There is no second chance, no, oh, well, maybe I can change him. None of that. You're just out. And if you've got those safety nets and you've done that work, at least it gives you a bit of protection so that you can date again with a bit more confidence.
I completely agree with you. I always do the same thing with my clients. I've got my ideal relationship worksheet as well, or my ultimate relationship workshop or worksheet. And I get them to go through this and work out what they want in a partner, what they need, and what that looks like for them. Because like you just said, quite often they will just attach themselves to the first person that also reminds them of their ex. Maybe they dated someone who was 6'3". All my partners are now going to be 6'3". Or all my partners are going to be 25-year-old women from Sweden, for example, because that's what I had. But that didn't work out for you. So be open-minded as much as you can, and you'll realise there are lots of people out there who would love to meet you. And it really is a wonderful time right now to meet new people, because everyone's come out of this pandemic and we're looking much more seriously than ever before. Sara, thank you so much. If someone wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Oh, thank you, James. So they can visit my website, saradavison.com, or find me on social media. I'm very active on Instagram, Sara Davison Divorce Coach.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I would love to talk to you much more, and I know we will do, but for the purpose of this, I know you're really, really busy. So thank you so much, and I'll speak to you very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, James, for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to give you a free copy of my latest book, which you can download right now from my website, jamespriest.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the love by taking a few seconds to write a positive review on the iTunes store right now. See you next time.